Content overview. In this presentation, I will be talking about the concept of self, like self-schemas, self-perception, and self-esteem. I'll also be talking about perception, like attribution theories. I'll also cover social comparison theory, like why do people find the need to compare themselves to others? I'll talk about attribution theory in detail, and then the research study about social networking sites and their impact on self-esteem. Summary statement. The three major topics in this week's reading are the self-concept, social perception, and attribution theories. Self-concept covers how individuals view themselves. This includes self-esteem, self-perception, and so on. Social perception is quite simply how people come to understand one another from the elements of appearance, situations, and behavior. Lastly, attribution theories describe how people explain the causes of behavior. Together, these three topics aim to explain why we perceive ourselves and others the ways we do. The concept of self. Self-concept, according to Casson, is the sum total of an individual's beliefs about his or her own personal attributes. An example of this would be Henry thinking of himself as very masculine, funny, introverted, or smart. People are multifaceted. This means that our self-concept has a variety of self-schemas. According to a researcher, self-schemas are beliefs about oneself that guide the processing of self-relevant information. So to be able to see yourself as a separate being in society is possibly the first step in the concept of self. Self-perception theory. A theory developed by Daryl Bem in 1972 that when internal cues are difficult to interpret, people gain self-insight by observing their own behavior. An example of this would be realizing how fast you ate your sandwich and making that inference that you must have been hungry. Facial feedback hypothesis says that changes in facial expression can lead to corresponding changes in emotion. Social comparison theory. A theory by Leon Festinger that people evaluate their own abilities and opinions by comparing themselves to others. Social psychologists have applied this by asking two questions. When do people turn to others for comparative information? Is it possibly when they are uncertain? Or question 2. Of all the people who inhabit the earth, with whom do we choose to compare ourselves? Possibly we compare ourselves with those we are very similar to. Self-esteem. An effective component of the self consisting of a person's positive and negative self-evaluations. We are judgmental, motivated, emotional, and highly protective of our self-esteem. The way we view ourselves varies based on the culture we live in, who we are, and so on. For example, some people get their sense of worth from their image, career accomplishments, affluence, and so on. The sociometer theory says that self-esteem is a gauge that monitors our social interactions and sends us signals as to whether our behavior is acceptable to others. Another theory under self-esteem is the terror management theory. It's a theory that humans cope with fear of their own death by constructing worldviews that help preserve their self-esteem. Social networking and self-esteem. This is a study done by Valkenburg, Peter, and Schouten, aimed to learn about the consequences of social networking sites and adolescent self-esteem. A survey was given to 881 adolescents aged 10 to 19 years old who had a profile on a Dutch networking site. The individuals who received mostly positive feedback on their pages had higher self-esteem, whereas individuals who received negative feedback on their pages had lower self-esteem. Throughout all the research on internet use and well-being, the results are very mixed. Sometimes there is actually no significant relationship between the variables. Social perception. A general term for the processes by which people come to understand one another. The elements of social perception are persons, situations, and behavior. Persons would be like judging people based off of how they look. Like, let's say you go into a store and you see somebody with their hood on and their head hanging low and they kind of keep looking around like they're up to no good. That would be judging people based off of how they look. Situations are based on experiences. People can easily imagine how events will unfold. Let's say something happens to you like over and over again. You will typically believe that things will have the same outcomes if history, has proven to basically do that before, if that makes sense. Behavior, an essential first step in social perception. Recognize what someone is doing at a given moment. Attribution theories. Describe how people explain the causes of behavior, personal or situational. Personal would be the attribution to internal characteristics of an actor, such as ability, personality, mood, or effort. And then situational is the attribution that factors external to an actor, such as the task, other people, or luck. An essential point in underlying this theory is that causal analysis is fundamental and individuals need to understand social events. Fundamental attribution error is the tendency to focus on the role of personal causes and underestimate the impact of situations or on other people's behavior. Questions. In Galatians 6:4-5 reads, each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone, without comparing themselves to someone else, for each one should carry their own load. So how does this apply to social comparison theory? And why would comparing yourself to others be discouraged in the religious sense? Question number 2 reads, think about something that has happened to you recently and give an example of an internal attribution that you made, as well as an external attribution. So number 2 is actually kind of a two-part answer, just like number 1 is.